Chapter 491 Realization. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Don't worry kids, Uncle Max will protect you, Max said as he fought off the intense pain in his ribs and stood upright while picking up two palm-sized rocks from the rubble of the explosion. Grrrr, the pack of 5 wolves growled as they slowly circled in on him. Max tried to summon Thunderblast to fry them to a crisp, but found his body once again unable to sense and mobilize mana as he could not summon his attack. Harry the werewolf pounced on Max, and despite his slow and heavy body, Max rolled out of his way comfortably as he threw one of the rocks in his hands towards another wolf's head who was flanking him from the right, hitting him straight on his face. Harry was slightly surprised that Max was able to evade him, but he immediately turned to face him again after landing and pounced once more. This time he was coming in from Max's blind side and had expected to take his head off with one big bite, but at the last moment Max fell flat on his back, narrowly escaping his pounce as he grabbed something personal in the process. Ball crushing, an extremely painful howl that would resound throughout the upside was unleashed by Harry, who felt his man parts turn into mangled mess. Max had viciously crushed his private parts, leaving him incapacitated and in a world of pain. As if crushing it were not enough, Max was hell-bent on ripping it straight out of his body, and would have succeeded in doing so if his other werewolf brethren did not come to his rescue. Words could not describe how good it felt for Max to finally crush the balls of Harry, the wolf who had gouged his eyes out during the final moments of his life, as today, after many years, he finally had an opportunity to exact his revenge. Max realized that although he did not have any mana, any bloodline abilities and any physical prowess, he still had his knowledge. He could still use Way of the Wind, and sense his enemy's movements despite not having any mana, and could also sense the subtle temperature fluctuations in his environment, thanks to his deep understanding of the fire element. This trial was designed to make him feel powerless once again, to make him feel as if without his special race, his class and his path of the perfect warrior, he was nothing. However, all it did was remind Max that while everything else betrayed him, just with the knowledge that he had gained throughout his journey, he was much stronger than his previous self. If instead of focusing on the wrong things in his past life that he could not control, he had focused on things that were within his control, such as looking for all the knowledge in the universe from all the archives available to him, he might have found various solutions to his own predicament, or find new ways to progress in his life. He could have been like Earth's late great scientist Stephen Hawking, who despite being a cripple who needed to be spoon-fed was able-minded and was able to use his mind to reach great heights. Agreed that in his past life the odds were stacked against him. But if only he had looked past his disability to not use mana and focused on his very competent brain, he could have been much more than a disgruntled government worker. While he was reflecting on all this, he was jolted back to reality by a claw attack launched by the leader of the enemy werewolf camp, who had become much more serious after seeing the bad condition that Max had left Harry in. They no longer took Max lightly and had began circling him from all sides, willing to give him no chance to inflict more damage to their side. Max's brain started turning full speed. Ball crushing would no longer work, as if he committed to injuring one wolf, the others would tear him apart. While standing without any weapons and unable to mobilize any spells, there were not many ways in his disposal with which he could inflict damage on his enemies. He needed to think about some solution to this, and fast, because while he could sense their attacks coming and dodge for a while, his stamina would end up running out very fast with this frail body, after which he would be sitting duck for their attacks. Meanwhile Sebastian spent about 3 full days calmly surveying the temple from all sides, drawing its layout and trying to use his dwarf intellect to figure out the construction pattern. He was very careful throughout the 3 days to only move when there were no undead around, as he absolutely avoided conflict. After 3 days, he had a rough idea of the temple's layout, and using his one encounter of entering the main hall as reference to approximately draw the boundaries of that room, Sebastian realized that there was about 300 meters of unknown construction space behind that hall. That space behind had 2 bifurcations, one went straight backwards, while the other had a slightly right curve for reasons that Sebastian could not understand. He assumed that the treasure room was at the very end of one of these 2 paths, and by logic it should have been the one which was going straight backwards till the very end, which was why Sebastian decided to dig at the right corner. If logic said that it should be straight, Sebastian had confidence in predicting the narcissistic necromancer's line of thought and putting it in the right side. The reason why he thought this way was because any person who willingly constructed a temple as ugly as this could not be judged by common sense. Now only time would show if his prediction was right or wrong, as there was a high possibility that instead of digging a hole to the treasure room he would maybe end up in a boss room fight. Chapter 492 Heart Demon Conquered. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Max was surrounded on all four sides by werewolves. The only weapon in his possession was a piece of rock and there was no help coming. In this situation Max knew that he had only two ways to win, which were to try the divine and conquer strategy, and attack them on their throats as hard as he could with the rock to collapse their airway when given the chance. Oh, come on now. Don't waste your time circling me looking for openings. You have created a commotion in the middle of the most guarded city on Earth. Swarms of troops are going to be here any moment now. This is your only chance. Who is the leader amongst you all? The Alpha. It looks like it's you, Rick. After all, you are the biggest and the strongest of them all, Max said, as despite knowing that Rick was not the leader of this werewolf group and not even remotely the largest and strongest looking, he took his name and threw in a bait. I'm the Alpha, and yes, you are right, we should attack you. The biggest looking werewolf said as he constricted his hind legs and was ready to pounce on Max. Whoa whoa whoa, I'm fine with you jumping on me and all, but are you guys sure he is your Alpha? His fur looks rabid. I thought he is the old guy in the group. You young werewolves taking orders from this punk? Max said, trying to incite an internal strife amongst them, as for a moment the other wolves faltered as the Alpha angrily pounced on Max. Max put his left arm over his head, understanding full well that the pouncing wolf will bite on it and break his bones in the process, but it was a necessary sacrifice since that was the only move where he would have enough leverage to attack its exposed airway. Crunch! Excruciating pain sent a jolt of electricity running throughout Max's body as the Alpha wolf sank its teeth in his left arm, biting with full force and threatening to tear it off his hand. Had the other wolves been on the ready, they too would have pounced on him at this instance and it would have been game over for him, but because of his previous comments they were 2 seconds slower than they normally would have been, which was all the time that Max needed to puncture the Alpha wolf's airway with the rock he held in his right hand. Hitting with precision, Max landed a critical hit on the werewolf, who instantly lost his balance and began spitting blood as it desperately tried to breathe air. You're dead, Max said as he dodged the subsequent claw swipes from his fellow wolf mates, who looked rattled to see their Alpha struggle so much. Just as Max expected, within 10 seconds the Alpha wolf's body began to spasm as he desperately tried to keep its body alive, but his lungs had been flooded with blood and he was going to unmistakably die in a few moments. Its bloodshot eyes watched Max with immense hatred as Max stared right back, savoring every moment of it as he stood holding a rock with one hand and a mangled bleeding arm on the other. Max was in a world of pain, enough to make a normal human go unconscious from all the suffering, but this much pain was now insufficient to incapacitate Max. Pain was an odd friend to him now, and this level of torture was a routine. What was a threatening injury that would render a normal Tier 1 warrior useless was only a mild inconvenience for Max. He could no longer use his left arm, but it was no problem. 2 down, 3 more to go, he thought as he looked at the other 3 werewolves with a creepy smile and said, now that the rabid-biting Alpha is dead, who is next in command? It's gotta be you, Rick. Come on, old pal, this is your chance to step up to the big stage. Rick's eyes fluttered with ambition as he raised his head high, but the other 2 werewolves instantly started growling at him, both seemingly dissatisfied with him taking the Alpha position. The hierarchy in the pack is a given. I was the beta, and since the Alpha is dead, I'm the leader now, one of the other 2 werewolves said as he reminded the other 2 of the age-old rules. Him. Ha 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 ha, the weakest looking one of all 5 of you. Max said at the appropriate moment, instantly invalidating the beta's proclamation as his timely comment made Rick and the other wolf dangerously growl and charge at him as they intended to challenge the status quo. Max's talk no jutsu seemed to be successful, as soon the three werewolves embroiled themselves in an internal strife as they bit and scratched each other in an attempt to assert dominance, all while Max calmly watched them tear each other apart. Eventually, Rick was able to come out on top as he stood tall over the other two werewolves who, after sustaining many bruises and cuts, chose to stand down and yield the command to Rick. What they did not expect, however, was that in this moment Max would suddenly appear out of nowhere and tackle Rick's body from the side by ramming into him shoulder first, only to grab him by the neck while the two of them rolled on the floor from the momentum of the impact, and twisting it with full power to snap his neck and kill him with one stroke. "Rot in hell, Rick," Max said as he stood tall over the dead body of the third werewolf, the blood from his mangled arm dripping into dead Rick's eyes that were still wide open. The two alive and bruised werewolves could not decide what to do after Max's brutal performance of killing two of their strongest members and incapacitating their third, as without a clear change of command they were now hesitant in attacking Max, who was very much capable of taking their lives. "Come on, gentlemen, let's dance," Max said with a maniacal expression on his face as he bared his tongue and opened his eyes to the widest. "That's a crazy human. Let's grab Harry and run," one of the two surviving werewolves suggested as the other one tacitly agreed. They immediately transformed back to their demi-human forms and rushed to pick up Harry, who was rolling on the floor in pain, as they picked him up and ran. Max chased them while laughing and throwing rocks with no real intention to drag this into a deathmatch and actually catch up to them. While being at the same physical level as he was at his death, this time Max had managed to defend the lives of his niece and nephew against the invasion, alone and without the help of any powers. Had Max sought out to look for these specific werewolves in the real world after his reincarnation, which he had thought about doing several times, the revenge would not have felt this sweet, as they would still be tier 2 and much weaker than he was. Only because he won in the exact same conditions as before, did a big knot in his heart finally resolve as he heard a system notification to signify the same. System notification. You have resolved all latent guilt in your heart and have confronted your worst fear and managed to overcome it. Stage 1 has been cleared with SSS rating, now moving on to Stage 2, LO////A/N. Bonus chapter for hitting the PS target, good job everyone, /////. Chapter 493 Bizarre Scenarios. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Max was pleasantly surprised to see the system notification. Stage 1 had been an emotional journey for him, and while it was bitter-sweet, it was undoubtedly a thrilling experience for him. What surprised him, however, was not the fact that he managed to clear it, but the fact that he cleared it with an SSS rating. Max was not sure on what the evaluation criteria was, but he was happy that he managed to clear it with a perfect score. He was not given much time to celebrate, however, as within seconds the second stage of the Tier 5 promotion test began. System notification. The second stage of the Tier 5 promotion test begins. It is a test of character and beliefs. Good luck, adventurer. Max found himself standing on a round stage with many bright spotlights pointed in his direction that made it difficult for him to see what was ahead of him clearly. There was a stage in front of him, and on that stage were three figures that looked humanoid, but Max could not discern any of their features because of the extremely bright spotlights in their background, which made them appear just a shadow. We will give you 3 scenarios. At the end of each scenario there will be a question. Your task is to answer that question as truthfully as possible. Nod if you understand, the 3 voices said simultaneously as Max tried to block some of the bright light coming straight into his eyes using his palm as he nodded. First scenario. You are a primordial vampire who is aware of the ancient prophecy that mentions that should you become king, your rule will bring disaster for everyone but yourself. Assuming you do become king and the population of vampires dwindles to just 10% of what it is today because of internal strife and wars. Would you regret your choice? And would you change your decision if given a second chance in time and not pursue the throne, knowing it spells disaster for your entire kind? Max listened to the question carefully and could not help but frown at what the question was insinuating. Yes, there was an ancient prophecy on his ass which said that should he take the throne it would spell disaster for the entire vampire kind, but it did not mean he intentionally willed them harm. Max was not evil. He did not seek the throne to destroy vampire society as a whole. He genuinely wanted his subjects to be happy and prosperous under his reign, and when he became king that would precisely be his goal. After analyzing the question carefully he said, "There will be no chaos, internal strife or civil war when I take up the throne. Just like how a Tier 0 warrior would not resist the will of a Tier 4 commander. 99% of my subjects would be Tier 4 and under while I shall be a Tier 8 king. They will not resist my commands. The only individuals who might resist me would be Tier 6 and above, where it would be a clear choice between bending the knee or keeping the head. My ascension may be bloody for the various vampire gods. But it won't affect the commoners. While I can't guarantee anything for the nobles, the commoners surely won't suffer. Would I regret it if my population dwindled to 10%? No. I know I would have never demanded unnecessary bloodshed, I would have never destroyed planets where millions of innocents live. I would only ever seek a fight with my equals and never stoop so low as to kill weaklings. So if the population dwindles, it's because their lords or leaders are cowards. While it is most disturbing, it has nothing to do with me, for which I shall have no regret over the outcome. In the future I will be king, whether I'm the king of one individual or 100 billion, only one thing will be true, and that is the fact that I will be king, Max said with conviction as he answered the first question to the best of his abilities. He understood his own moral bottom line and knew that he would never demand the blood of the innocent, but if it inevitably got shed during his process of his ascension, it was not going to affect his conscience at all. Just but ruthless, said the first judge who had asked the question as he seemed to scribble down his score from the movements of his shadow. For a brief moment, there was silence, but soon after the first judge was done scribbling the second judge asked him a question. Second scenario. You have two nephews, Jake and Kartike, and you are aware that both of them are monstrous talents that will make their mark on a universal scale when they grow up. Assuming that one of the two develops a desire for your throne and wishes to snatch your power from you, what will your decision be when they march to your palace steps with an army? Will you yield out of love? Or fight him to the death? The second judge asked as Max could not believe his own ears when he heard this question. These judges were asking him about scenarios that had not yet happened and were putting him in a very difficult position. Max had considered himself to be a very contemplative individual who often brooded about things that could be, but never had he ever thought about the bizarre scenarios that he was being asked to assess today. What he did not know was that the three judges whose figures he could not see were actually the celestial trio of gods called Fate, and they spun and controlled the strings of fate and destiny to a certain extent. The questions that he was being asked today were some of the possible futures of his own life, and his answers today were going to help the celestial gods decide on whether or not they wanted to allow him to advance, or whether his ambitions and actions would ruin the balance of the universe. Chapter 494 Bottom line. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The idea that one of his adorable nephews would one day vie for his throne was weird for Max. The kids meant a lot to him, and no matter what happens in the future he was ready to be their biggest backing. However, should one of them really march up with an army in their town with the intention to take his throne, that would really put him in a spot. Should it not be his blood kin, he would have had no qualms to use his full power and crush his opponent. He would rather die than yield his throne. However, should it be one of Rudra's sperm spawns, the matter was completely different. He could never kill them. Unless they personally did something unforgivable like killing a Saiva or their mothers, Max would never go as far as crippling or killing them even if they marched with an army to his doorstep. He would not yield his throne. If the nephew that challenged him had the sufficient strength to win it from him, then he would just consider himself to be old and gracefully accept defeat. However, if he did win, which he most likely would considering the power gap that existed between them, he would not go as far as killing them for the challenge. Imprisonment was likely, maybe a few heart-to-heart sessions of talk. If the kid apologized after the defeat, Max would also most likely forgive him and treat the incident as the kid's naivety. Once he was sure about his own feelings, he looked towards the judge in the center and said, "Well, I have worked very hard to get that throne, and still have a long journey to make if I really hope to reach there one day, so there will be little chance that I yield it without a fight. If the boy is strong enough to take me down, he can have the throne. He must have undergone a hell of a journey himself to reach that level, and then in a way he would deserve to succeed me. But if not and he falls short in his attempt, I will not kill him. He is my blood in the end, and all mistakes are forgiven in blood relations. Your familial love supersedes your ambitions." "How mortal-minded," the judge in the middle said as he scribbled down some notes and wrote down his assessment of Max, just like the judge before him did too. A few minutes passed in silence as Judge 2 scribbled down something, but the moment he was done it was Judge number 3 who asked the final question. Situation 3. Your special race makes it so that you can no longer have kids with any other species but the dragons and the vampires. Although you are aware of this fact, will you ever deceive an innocent woman into marrying you for nothing but political gains, knowing full well that she would never be happy in the marriage if she does not experience the joy of motherhood? Judge number 3 asked as Max felt his brain hurt at these questions. What the fuck were these scenarios even about? What sort of a twisted individual would open somebody's profile and decide that these were the kind of interview questions they wished to ask to evaluate an individual? Yes, Max was completely aware that he could only have babies with either the vampire race or the dragon race after his draconification, which was why he had long made up his mind to make Asiva his only life partner. But him having babies out of love was one issue, and him marrying someone for nothing but political gains was another. Would he ever deceive Asiva this way? Absolutely not. He cared and loved Asiva and would never hurt her intentionally, and the same applied for Mira and Anna, whom he knew and cared for. But if he was ever put in a situation where marriage with someone unknown could bring him massive political advantages, then he would marry her in a heartbeat. Her happiness would not matter to him as long as he did not care deeply about her. Well, it would suck to be her who would marry someone cold like him, who would most likely never love her or be the father of her children, but it was not an issue for Max himself. Of course, as her husband he would provide her with all the luxuries that he could afford and would not intentionally cause her to be sad, but it would also not stop him from lying to her and getting what he wanted at the start. Yes, I would deceive her if it brought me advantages. I'm no saint when it comes to such matters. If once my political ambitions are achieved she wants to divorce, I would grant her that freedom in a heartbeat, but until then I would use her as a tool, Max said as he confessed to the third judge that although killing his kin was beneath his bottom line, marrying just for the heck of it was not. The judge began scribbling down on his notepad as after a while he said, "Barely acceptable." Once he was done scribbling, the three judges began discussing amongst one another about the future of Max, as for about 2 odd hours Max just stood there developing a headache from the bright lights as the shadows debated over his performance. In the end, after a lot of discussion, they said in unison, "You pass, system notification. You have cleared stage 2 of the tier promotion test and will now be teleported to the final stage. Good luck, adventurer." Note: Stage 2 had only 2 outcomes, pass or fail, and you have passed. There is no evaluation grade attached to this round. Max was in surprise once this stage ended because he could not understand the point behind it. However, it did not truly matter as he had passed and was moving on to the last test, which was all that he truly cared about. //////A/N This bonus chapter is sponsored collectively by my patrons on Patreon /////. Chapter 495 Clone v Clone v Clone v Clone. You are listening at novelfull.audio. System notification. The third and final stage of the Tier 5 promotion test is beginning. It's a test to surpass one's own limits. Good luck, adventurer. Max found himself in a room much like the mirror world where he often practiced fighting against his clone, and much like the mirror world he was facing someone who looked just like him, but from its demeanor alone Max could see that it was a clone not controlled by Drax. Its opening stance had too many weaknesses, which was completely unlike the clone which Drax controlled. System notification. Defeat yourself in battle under 15 minutes for a perfect evaluation. Good luck, adventurer. Max raised his eyebrow in self-doubt. He had barely managed to hang that IN against the clone that Drax controlled, the seemingly perfect version of himself at the same tier, which is why he was apprehensive about defeating 1-in-1 versus 1 competition. What Max did not know was that while the clone that Drax controlled was the peak version of himself at tier 5, a full tier above his abilities, the clone the system had put against him now was just someone at the peak of tier 4. The same realm of power that he was at. Max charged at his adversary and used Fire Blast, to which the enemy responded with a Fire Blast of his own. The two attacks of equal power collided and created a small explosion, neutralizing one another and creating a small smoke screen that made it difficult to see the opponent. Max jumped over the smoke screen and launched a Dragon's Breath, but the clone rolled away from the attack, having already sensed it using Way of the Wind. The clone countered with an Inferno spell aiming at the location where Max was supposed to land, but Max just took that attack head-on as he knew that he was immune to flames. The clone frowned as if its system had just crashed. It seemed to have forgotten that its enemy and itself were immune to fire damage, which made the whole sequence of attacks that it underwent completely pointless. Just as it was ready to move, it felt that it was bound by blood chains as the clone looked puzzled as to how Max introduced blood in this environment when he was clearly not bleeding. What the clone controlled by the system had missed was that the moment when the smoke screen was created from the two fire blasts colliding, Max had used the skill, Perfect Cloning, and had summoned his skill, Clone, to whom he had ordered to injure himself and draw blood. In the few short seconds that the enemy, clone, was distracted fighting him, the summoned clone had began to work its magic and was silently preparing to bind and immobilize the enemy. From the very start, Max knew that the only chance he would have to win this battle would be if he could somehow surprise and bind the opponent. Naturally, the enemy clone was also capable of using blood manipulation, so he instantly neutralized the spell binding its feet, but in that split second a Thunderblast rained down on its body. Kaboom! Max had deliberately not aimed for where the clone was standing, but rather aimed slightly to the right where it might attempt to dodge, and his assumption was perfect. Having fought a superior clone controlled by Drax time and time again, Max already knew what moves could and could not work against himself, and if he did not plan 2.3 moves ahead of his own further actions he would never manage to get a hold of himself in battle. Max was playing 4D chess in real time, performing many complex calculations at the same time as he managed to land a strong blow on his enemy and reduce its HP by 30%. The enemy clone also used Perfect Cloning, at this point, understanding the importance of having a capable fighter by its side, so there were 4 Maxes fighting against each other now. If some outsider were to witness this fight, where every Max had the means to neutralize each other's moves and plot for each other to fail in a fast-paced battle, they would feel their minds numbing after watching them fight for just 30 seconds. Nobody was able to get any upper hand on each other, as whatever one could do the other could do as well. Fire attacks were useless, sword attacks were too slow, and blood attacks were neutralized instantly. What little moves that Max was capable of except these were neutralized using Disperse, as what followed was just a nerve-wracking sequence of attack and defense. While it looked like the fight was even, in reality it was not. Max was feeling more and more in control with every move that he made his enemy expend, as he was starting to realize that this match up was much easier than his regular fights with Drax. In reality, this stage of the Tier 5 promotion test was supposed to be the hardest. One was meant to feel powerless and suppressed while facing the best version of themselves at the same tier, but unfortunately for the system this did not apply for Max, who had been training like a freak under this same setting for years now. To him this was routine, and having been beat over 5,000 plus times by Drax-controlled clone, he knew exactly how to drag his opponent into deep waters and then expose his own weaknesses one after another. Only 3 minutes had passed since the start of the battle, but Max had made sure that the enemy had expended all of his big moves except Buddha's Avatar and Energy Blast, at this point Energy Blast was the only attack the opponent had that was not a sword attack and could still seriously damage Max as the others went into cooldown. While Buddha's avatar was a defensive formation which, while great for defense, was the move that Max was hoping to trigger since his agility in that form was greatly compromised. The second that the enemy clone triggered the Buddha's avatar, Max brought out his legendary Grade Goldman's sword that he had plundered from Eden's body and began his final showdown as his clone held down the system clone. It was time for him to go into hyperspeed drive. Chapter 496 Tier 5 complete. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With the enemy clone activating Buddha's avatar, he was pretty much planted to his spot, unable to maneuver as necessary to keep up with Max's explosive attacks. His sword in hand, Max moved like the spirit of the Griffalos had possessed him as he was extremely nimble on his feet, moving beyond what the clone could keep up with, as although it could detect Max's incoming attacks using Way of the Wind. With the Buddha's avatar active, it could not keep up with Max's speed as Max kept striking against its golden body again and again and again. 430.500.600.730.300.300 .400.500. Max was dishing out an insane degree of DPS, and while his clean strikes could only dish out a damage of few hundred because of the Buddha's avatar having ridiculously high defense, slowly but surely the enemy's HP was draining at a visible rate. Had the enemy clone still have attacks like Thunderblast and 9 Ashura Sword Slash available, it could have potentially pushed Max back, but with those big moves already on cooldown, it was a sitting duck against Max's rampage, as the only options it had were either fire or blood attacks, both of them ineffective against Max. Max was a unique build, most of his offensive prowess came from his fire attacks and it was supplemented well by his blood attacks. But other than that, he did not have many versatile moves in his arsenal. While this did not matter much when facing a varying range of opponents, when facing himself it made for an interesting battle, since his primary mode of attack, fire, became useless, and unless his opponent had a greater mastery over blood manipulation than him, it became useless too. This left only physical brawling as an option, to which the Golden Buddha was a very effective counter, but with having fought thousands of battles against himself, Max knew that while the Golden Buddha looked like the best move on the chessboard, in reality it was not. It had a weakness that could be exploited, and he was doing exactly that. Little by little, Max whittled down the HP of the enemy clone and brought it down to a dangerous red level before the Golden Buddha had taken enough damage for the clone to prematurely dispel it. In a precarious position now, the enemy clone needed to desperately turn the situation around, but it found that it had no cards to play to get it out of this situation. Max thrust his sword towards the abdomen of the clone, who twisted to the side to avoid the thrust. "How very predictable," Max said as he smacked his lips and smiled. Closing the gap between himself and the clone's body as he pulled back the thrusted sword, Max tried to hold on to the enemy clone's arm. The enemy clone was alarmed. Max was preparing to employ the blood explosion technique. It needed to neutralize this threat immediately, or else it would be reduced to minced meat. What it did not expect was that Max's summoned clone would suddenly prepare a suicidal attack as it turned its back towards the system clone and lunged in to attempt an overhead slash, right this second. This move exposed its back to the system clone, who used a 9 Ashura Sword Slice of its own to reduce Max's clone's HP to a dangerous red level, but it was not enough. On the other hand, the enemy clone was defeated by the overhead slash, which ended the bout in favor of Max. Booyah! Max cheered as the enemy clone and its summoned system clone turned to dust as he and his clone stood tall in the battle. System notification. You have completed the stage 3 of the tier promotion test in 6 minutes 47 seconds. You have been given a perfect score for this battle at SSS, system notification. For achieving the extraordinary feat of defeating your own clone in under 7.5 minutes, your final evaluation has been improved from SSS, SSS+, system notification. You have completed the Tier 5 promotion test, successful, passing all 3 stages. Congratulations, adventurer, you are now officially a Tier 5 warrior. System notification. You have completed the Tier 5 promotion test with grading. Stage 1. SSS/SSS Stage 2. Pass/Pass Stage 3. SSS Plus/SSS Final Grade. SSS Plus, System Notification. Your final grade has gone above the set threshold value, calculating additional rewards. Meanwhile Sebastian had been digging for 4 days now and had managed to excavate a U-shaped tunnel from the outside of the forest to what he believed to be the basement of the necromancer's treasure room. Having finally hit what seemed like a solid tile, this was going to be the moment of truth for him. If he removed the tile and found himself in the middle of some boss room fight, Sebastian was going to instantly teleport back to the Light Faction safe zone where his return token was stored, but if there was no immediate danger he would slowly explore the area and loot it dry if it were a treasure room. On the other hand, if there was no immediate danger and no treasure either, Sebastian decided to try again from the other end of the spectrum down the center. Profusely praying to Kremeth, he lifted the tile to the room as the acrid stench of death and decay entered his nose, making him wish he never lifted the tile. Resolving himself to peek more, he lifted the tile just enough to get his eye level over the floor level as he scanned his surroundings to see where he was. He found himself in the middle of a dark room where various golems remained unmoving. Dovco about 5 meters to his left was a big coffin which seemed to be the cause of the stench of death. Sebastian tried to inspect the coffin to see what exactly it was, but his system scanning failed as the object returned as a series of question marks. Sebastian was not discouraged after seeing that the inspection returned as a series of question marks, but was rather excited about the prospects of its contents. If anything was too high level to be inspected, his experience as an adventurer told him that it was guaranteed to be of high value. Had it been any other adventurer they might have lost their calm and decided to rashly approach the coffin, but not Sebastian. He was a thorough coward and his cowardly senses told him that rather than taking the risk of entering the room, it was a smarter choice to dig a hole under the coffin such that it would fall through the ground and into his clutches. This way the threat of triggering the activation of golems could be contained, while the content of the coffin could be explored much more safely. Deciding that it was the best approach, Sebastian researched the dimensions and position of the coffin relative to his current position thoroughly, before slowly lowering the tile and once again picking up his makeshift shovel as he began digging a perfect pit for the coffin to fall into. /////A/N. Tomorrow will be a one-chapter day that will be about the rewards of Tier 5 promotion, and voting on the choices will be open as usual. So don't miss tomorrow's update if possible, guys. All your votes are most important. ///// Chapter 497 Rewards. You are listening at novelfull.audio. System Notification. You have completed the Tier 5 promotion test with grading. Stage 1. SSS/SSS Stage 2. Pass/Pass Stage 3. SSS Plus/SSS Final Grade. SSS Plus, System Notification. Your final grade has gone above the set threshold value, calculating additional rewards. System Notification. Calculation complete, distributing rewards. Fixed promotion rewards. 1. All stats times 2.5, SSS plus special reward. 2. Gained resistance against illusion attacks and disorientation. 3. Hidden stat, Wisdom, plus 5, comprehension improves significantly. Secondary rewards based on performance. 1. Intelligence stat plus 52, the power of all existing spells has been increased by 25%. 3. Mana cost for executing Tier 4 spells and below has been reduced by 30%. 4. Muscle elasticity and explosive strength is slightly improved. 5. You have gained high stun resistance, SSS plus special reward. Optional rewards. Choose 2 out of 5 skill moves. The quality of available choices has been set to maximum for SSS plus reward, Ethereal Veil. This is a defensive skill that the player can use to envelop themselves or an ally in a protective spiritual energy. It offers a shield that absorbs a certain amount of damage before dissipating. Ethereal Veil also provides minor resistance to magic damage and status effects. Echoing Steel. The player channels their mana into their blade, causing the blade to vibrate and to send out ethereal sword waves in the direction of the strike. These waves deal a percentage of the swordsman's attack damage to enemies they pass through. Note: this is a sound-based attack that is impossible to evade physically, and the damage it dishes out is not dependent on the number of people it affects. Arcane Singularity. The player summons a volatile sphere of pure magical energy at a target location. After a brief delay, the sphere implodes, pulling all enemies towards its center and dealing massive magic damage. The implosion can also help disrupt enemy casting by briefly silencing them. Elemental Infusion. Infuse your blade with the power of any one of the 6 primary elements to increase the damage caused by the blade and its special properties. Frostbite Totem. Create a totem pole imbued with the icy cold of the furthest glaciers. The totem radiates chilling winds in a large radius, slowing enemies within its influence and gradually dealing ice damage over time. Note: casting time to create a Frostbite Totem at beginner mastery is 1 minute. SSS Plus Special Class Specific Rewards, additional option given for reaching SSS Plus stage. Choose 2 out of 6 options. Heart of the Storm. The Blood Shaman becomes the epicenter of a violent, crackling thunderstorm. Lightning bolts continuously strike enemies within the storm, dealing tremendous damage. The shaman is immune to damage and crowd control effects during the storm but cannot move. Elemental Convergence. Combine 2 or more spells of differing elemental nature to create an unstable and more deadly third spell. Thunderblast can be combined with Dragon's Breath to form Thundering Dragon's Breath that deals both fire and lightning damage to the enemy at the same time. Sanctuary of Serenity. This is a powerful healing ability that creates a zone of restorative energy at a chosen location. Allies within the zone are healed over time and receive a temporary boost to their health regeneration rate. Additionally, while inside the sanctuary, allies are shielded from status ailments and debuffs. Elemental Conclave. The shaman god Angakok has spent centuries enslaving elementals of various descents, and as his chosen you have the ability to tap into the elemental planes, calling forth a conclave of elemental beings to fight alongside you in battle. This skill allows you to summon a group of elemental entities, such as fire elementals, water spirits, or earth golems, with each elemental possessing a unique ability based on their element and can wreak havoc upon enemies. Rise of the Horde. One of Angakok's most feared skills that has put the shaman race on the map to be one of the most feared classes. For the duration of 1 hour, the caster loses mana at a constant rate of 50 units/second and covers an area of 50 km/2 to reap the souls of all that have died within the region. After 1 hour, the shaman returns the souls of the dead to their bodies and becomes their sole master, giving rise to the Horde. Note: after activation the skill becomes a passive move. Cannot enslave the soul of anyone at the same tier or above. Cannot be cancelled once started. Veil of Desolation. The shaman shrouds the battlefield in an aura of desolation and despair. This ultimate mortal skill causes all enemies within range to suffer from reduced accuracy, decreased movement speed, and impaired skill execution. The Veil of Desolation can cripple enemy morale and increase the chance of troops breaking rank or retreating. Max looked at all of his choices and felt his mind numb from excitement. Each and every single skill in there was worth dying for. He had truly hit the jackpot this time around. Meanwhile Sebastian, after 6 hours of digging, Sebastian was finally ready to hemorrhage the last layers of soil supporting the coffin above his head that would make it suddenly collapse into the pit he had dug underneath. He was a little tired from all the hours that he had spent digging, but was also mildly excited because all his hard work might finally end up being paid off. As he removed the final layers of soil, the weight of the coffin collapsed on itself and fell straight into the pit that he had created. Sebastian felt the earth tremor as he could only assume that the bone golems that he had seen in the room above were finally triggered into activation with the coffin disappearing, which meant that he needed to get the fuck out of here as soon as possible. Sebastian tried to open the lid of the coffin, but it was too damn heavy, as if it weighed a full ton. Putting his full back behind it, Sebastian managed to open it just enough for a finger to slide by, and at that moment he felt something reach out from the coffin towards his donger as he reflexively shrieked and pulled back. Crunch! The bones snapped under the weight of the coffin lid and a decapitated hand flailed and rolled on the floor. The coffin began shaking violently at this moment, as it seemed like the body of the necromancer was extremely angry about how things were turning out to be. Luckily for Sebastian, on the chopped-off palm there was a glistening ring, as he immediately held the flailing bone palm and pulled the ring out of the index finger. Agh! Sebastian screamed in pain, as just by touching the bones of the palm, Sebastian's lively flesh began to degenerate and decay, sending urgent pain signals to his brain. Thankfully, he had managed to get the ring out in the moment of contact, as he clutched it with his now black-blue hands and immediately moved away from the coffin. Divine. Sebastian tried inspecting the ring, but it failed, which was all the proof that he needed that it was exactly the treasure he was looking for. Suddenly, the coffin lid was opened with a violent explosion, as the most creepy-looking skeleton draped in luxurious robes that were now on fire from whatever explosive method it had used to open the lid raised its body and glared its hollow eyes toward Sebastian. Who dare? Before the skeleton could even complete its introductory sentence, which it was probably speaking for the first time in many centuries, Sebastian chose to instantly teleport out of the area as he activated the return token. Sebastian had hoped that he would teleport away instantly as usual, but to his horror, while he could feel the dimensional pull of the portal on one side, he was feeling an equal resistance on the other side, as the necromancer seemed to have locked onto him with some mysterious pull. You dare run away after stealing? The necromancer was once again about to make his grand introductory sentence when Sebastian suddenly made a shocking face and pointed behind the necromancer, saying, "Look, a beautiful naked woman." It was so random and absurd that for a moment the necromancer was distracted as he glanced behind to see that there was nothing but dirt there, but as he looked back he realized that his distraction had weakened the pull he had over Sebastian, allowing him to enter the spatial portal and be whisked away to another corner of the universe. "No!" the necromancer shouted in agony. However, it was too late. The carefully crafted plan that he had made for his grand resurrection had been utterly ruined by a dwarf. /////A/N. This is it, guys, time to awaken from your slumber and to roll up your sleeves and exercise your democratic privilege as my privilege readers. You have 24 hours to vote for the choices as usual. The only request I have is that only vote 2 from normal and 2 from class-specific options for a total of 4 choices. When you comment in favor of 3.4 options from a single section, it makes the counting process difficult. ////. Chapter 498 Choices 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Max looked at all the choices he had and began considering the pros and cons of each very seriously. This time the system had been generous and had significantly improved the quality of move.set choices in the first list, but for some reason had reduced the number of options he could select. This time he could only choose 2 from the normal list and 2 from the class-specific list for a total of 4 choices, and he needed to make all of them count. The first option to consider from the normal list was Ethereal Veil, a defensive-type move that could be deployed both for himself and on an ally. In critical moments it was an indispensable skill to have, because at times there could arise a need for him to cast protection over a Saiva or Sebastian or someone he loved in the heat of a war. The only problem was that its strength was not enough. The move had great physical defense, but its magical defense was not up to par. According to his knowledge, the move was one of the highest classified moves in the Mage Association under Tier 6, however, it was still not the first choice for most mages for defense-type moves. Hence, Max decided to regretfully let that move go in hopes of adding more versatile attack moves that he needed urgently. For versatile attacks, the best one was Frostbite Totem. The move was of the ice element nature, an element that he could not command yet, and he could see the practicality of the attack whether it was for siege or on an open battlefield. The move could be lethal to opposing armies who would be subjected to its relentless cold winds that had the chance of solidifying the moisture in the air to form solid ice. Over time, it could make enemy forces easily surrender due to the unbearable cold in a siege, while making them slow and susceptible to a barrage of arrows and projectiles in an open field battle. It was the third ice-type move that he had been offered for 3 subsequent promotion tests, and regretfully, like each time, he had to pass on it this time as well, because despite the usefulness of the attack, it did not have much power-up potential that Angekok had pointed him about during their training. The moves he selected now were going to become his pillars in the future, and he needed more practical moves rather than AoE debuff-type spells. He already had Nature's Whisperer in his arsenal, and when his mastery over it exceeded a certain limit, he would be able to create winds like those of the Frostbite Totem anyways, which is why he chose to pass on this option as well. The next 3 choices were very hard to choose between, as Echo Steel, Arcane Singularity and Elemental Infusion were all moves that Max could not afford to pass on. Had he been given 3 choices like every other promotion test, he would have chosen these 3 moves without hesitation, but since he could only choose 2, he needed to make a tough choice. Arcane Singularity was a void-type move, one that was not available for sale in the universe. There had been countless situations where Max felt that he needed a breather from the relentless pursuits of a group of enemies who gave him no quarter. In such situations, if he had a move like Arcane Singularity in his arsenal, he could have created a sphere of energy and have it implode such that it would create a void and pull everything in its sphere of influence towards a single point. With it he could have found a much-needed breather and turned around many difficult situations with ease. Since it was a given that he might find himself surrounded by multiple opponents at once in the future too, Max decided that Arcane Singularity was one move he could not pass on and decided to make it his first choice. This brought the selection process down to only Elemental Infusion and Echo Steel. Both moves had their undeniable merits. Echo Steel was the ultimate AoE move, as except Soundmancers that were far and few, it was an attack that was impossible to neutralize and could damage thousands with the same damage output. On the other hand, Elemental Infusion have him the chance to imbue his blade with all 6 basic elements, which would increase his damage output significantly and trigger a chance of dealing additional damage to an opponent. It was a thorough PvP move that had a plethora of wide range applications that one could not pass up on, so the choice boiled down to only PvP versus AoE for Max. After thinking about it calmly, Max decided to go for PvP prowess over AoE spell, having faith that his own skills would develop to a point where he would himself be a walking AoE disaster and would not need to rely on wide-range spells to do the job for him. With this choice made, Max had completed the normal skill choice selection and had to now shift his focus to the big guns, the most important moves that were specific only to his class. Meanwhile, Lucifer, for how long have you squabbled with the vampires for scraps? You are barbarians by nature, my savage king. Why should you side with the light faction weaklings and follow their weakling mentality of growing economies and providing stability? You are the most physically gifted race of them all, with even 5-year-old barbaric children capable of tearing down an adult human limb for limb. It's time for you to stop living like cowards and take your place amongst us, the dark faction, and take whatever you want. The vampire monarchy will be on their knees against you, the gold you need to feed your race will be plundered from their coffers. Just agree to join hands with us and we will help you achieve everything you ever dreamt of, Lucifer said teasingly as he tried to lure the Savage King, the Tier 8 monarch of the barbarians, to finally pivot to joining the dark faction. Your sweet words don't entice me, devil. I will join the dark faction, but it's only to avoid the destruction of my kind. I'm convinced that the light faction cannot stop your forces in the long run and will lose 1.2.3 monarchies minimum before they are reduced to a shell of their former size. The angel monarchy won't fall, not for the next 1,000 years at least. However, nobody else is invincible. The only reason why I joined you is because I don't want my people to be standing on the losing side, so save your sweet words for someone else. The Savage King said as he banged his warhammer against the floor, causing a loud bang sound to be made. Lucifer grinned from ear to ear hearing the Savage King's reply as he said, "Yes, we shall win indeed. But for that to happen, we need you to deploy 1,000,000 barbarians to the kingdom of death by tomorrow. Despite our best efforts we have not been able to push Hades back. He has gotten reinforcements from the true elites, Hazel Groove Empire, One Knights and the Angels and is holding strong. To push him back we need more numbers and if you wish to stand by us in victory you need to start committing for it now. The Savage King replied as he agreed to the arrangement. The mercenary King Avens had already turned to the dark side, but on this day the Savage King had also decided to turn his back on the light faction as he made his decision to join the dark side. //////A/N. Good choices everyone. However, I'd like to point out that ice moves are my favorite and yet somehow we can never vote on it in the end. Frostbite Totem got the lowest votes of all in the end. /////. Chapter 499 Choices, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. The next set of choices were tough to make for Max. Instead of 5 class-specific choices for getting SSS rating, he got 6 of them this time around for getting SSS+. While this was a good thing overall as having an extra choice was always welcome, but it also added the difficulty of making the final choice since all 6 options had their own merits and demerits. The move that Max was fine with eliminating was Veil of Desolation. It was the best sounding move on paper, but its practicality was limited. Morale was an intangible thing and he had first-hand experienced how important of a role it could play in a war. While it sounded powerful that a move could make the enemy morale low and may lead to them breaking ranks, Max got the feeling that this would most likely apply for weaker Tier 0. Tier 2 troops mainly while not affecting the really well-trained troops who would not crumple under morale restrictions. Of course it was a cool move to have with a specific application, it wasn't an absolute guarantee which was why Max chose to give it a pass. Rise of the Horde was a move that Max did not want to pass on. The sheer idea that he could raise the Fallen as his own sort of undead in battle gave him the chills. He could already imagine the sudden change in the tide of battle that it would bring when somehow he was able to reintroduce 100.150k dead soldiers back to the battlefield, raising a horde that would completely overwhelm whatever the enemy lines were holding against within moments. Despite the passive nature of activation and the high mana cost, it was a must-have move, but Max was slightly hesitant about choosing it knowing full well that it was one of Angakok's skills. He was the shaman god's chosen and was training by his side daily. If he wanted to learn one of his signature moves he could always request Angakok to teach it to him and while it was not a guarantee that Angakok would oblige, there was a fair chance that he might do so. That being the only reason, Max chose to pass on it for the moment. Another move that Max chose to pass up on after much regret was Heart of Storm. Personally, he was all for such an AoE move that would literally create a tornado of wind and thunder with him at its center as it would not only lift enemy soldiers up from their feet but also pelt them with constant lightning once they are lifted off their feet and this carnage would go on for several minutes wiping all enemies within a certain region. The only reason why Max chose to pass on such a broken ability that he desperately needed was because it came with the restriction that he could not move once he triggered the start of the spell. Not moving would expose him to many potential risks and should there be a tier 5 or higher opponent in the vicinity who could lock onto him despite the storm, he would become unable to dodge it considering his movement would be impaired. Since the move had a lot of drawbacks alongside advantages, Max chose to pass on it. This meant that the choice he needed to make now was choosing 2 moves between Elemental Convergence, Sanctuary of Serenity and Elemental Conclave. He knew he could not pass on Elemental Convergence. The very thought of combining 2 different elemental moves of varying damage to create a third unstable move with even more damage was something that opened the door to creating a lot of creativity and allowed Max to express all the abilities under his belt in a much better way. It was a broken skill through and through, one that could supplement all his other attack moves perfectly, which was why Max knew he had to select it. Having chosen Elemental Convergence, the choice was only left between Sanctuary of Serenity and Elemental Conclave. Both moves had its merits, and Max was quite aware of the Sanctuary of Serenity move in general as it was one of the core moves of the believers of the goddess Benyeger. If he had that move under his belt, he would not need a capable healer for his army and could fulfill that role himself. But the reason to choose it was also the reason that Max decided to pass on it. If he had a capable healer for his army, there was no need to select such a move, and a capable healer for his army could always be found. Now was not the time to play healer when he sorely lacked offensive capabilities, for which Elemental Conclave was the best option. Hence, making up his decision, Max chose the final skill option as Elemental Conclave, fully completing his Tier 5 promotion. Meanwhile Sebastian was currently on a desolate corner of the wet planet ruled by the Bloodfall clan, in an area where there was no civilization for hundreds of kilometers. There he was trying out his newfound abilities from the Necromancer's Ring as he was having his fun summoning thousands and thousands of undead soldiers who were marching to his every order. Ha ha ha. I can summon 100,000 Tier 3 undead soldiers. I am a commander now. Sebastian said as his laughter echoed in the empty plains. Ha ha ha, I can summon undead golems too. Just look at these 30-meter tall damage-soaking machines. Looks like I have my own version of Max's giant summoning, Sebastian said as he hugged the legs of his golem, but ended up looking like he was attempting to hug a wall. Ha ha ha, I can summon headless Durahell riders, I can summon 25,000 archers, I can summon 10,000 mages, I can summon 15 liches which can raise undead of its own. I've become a one-man army. /////A/N. All choices have been made. Cheers guys, thanks for voting /////. Chapter 500 updates. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Max came out of his tier promotion and found himself still biting onto that weird herb at the bottom of the lake. He took a moment to steady his breathing and then swam towards the lake's surface. A massive improvement I see. Your agility and constitution stat have even crossed the double digits. That's about what most gods have too. Congratulations boy, you might not be slaughtered if you fight against a god in an instant now. You might be able to at least hang in there for a couple of minutes. That's quite a feat for a mortal, Angekok said as he assessed Max's current state and was quite pleased with how things turned out. Not only did Max get a 2.5x multiplier for exceeding the SSS rating limit, but also chose skills that Angekok did not already possess, which meant that Angekok would have new skills at his disposal when he took over Max's body. This was a great development for the Blood Shaman god, who was feeling ecstatic looking at his future vessel developing so nicely. If you think I did a good job, then you have to reward me with one thing that I ask you for, Max said, knowing full well that this was his chance to strike while the iron was still hot. Oh, do tell boy, let me amuse you a bit, Angekok said as he looked intrigued as to what Max might request him for. In the promotion test rewards there was a move that was offered to me, one of your signature moves, the Rise of the Horde. I passed it up for elemental convergence, but I want to learn it. I've worked hard these last months, I deserve it, Max said, boldly asserting his claim to the move although he knew his demand was flimsy at best. Angekok scoffed. Rise of the Horde was one of his self-created moves. It was something that took him decades to perfect and undoubtedly one of his strongest moves. Had it been anyone but Max who requested it, Angekok would have instantly denied it, but he was in a good mood today and was feeling generous enough to reward the boy with it. Very well, I shall give you a memory packet about the move. Consider it to be your lucky day boy. Close your eyes, Angekok said as he placed his thumb between Max's eyebrows and shared the memory packet as to how to precisely use Rise of the Horde. Max reviewed the memory fragment and after 20 minutes of comprehending it he heard a system notification telling him that he had learnt that move to basic mastery. Thank you, Max said as he felt grateful for having been given such valuable knowledge for free. Angekok only smiled smugly in response as he took off alongside Max in his space bubble once more. Once again Max had no idea about their destination or what Angekok's true intentions were, but by now he knew better than to worry about things he could not control. It did not matter that he was now tier 5, in front of Angekok he was still an ant who could not lift a finger. Although he was incomparably stronger than he was just a day ago, it all came to nothing if it meant rebelling against the Blood Shaman. Whether for the worse or for the best, the next destination of the duo was a location that Max would have probably never found out about on his own. It was the planet where the third and final piece of the Agni, Astra was, and Angakok was taking Max there first to claim the last piece and complete the Agni, Astra to gain perfect mastery over the element of fire before he could be brought finally to the time chamber where his training in the other elements would finally begin. Meanwhile Regis's aura was leaking slightly, making the subordinates in the room feel a suffocating pressure as he read about the latest developments on the border. Apparently, the Savage King had lost his damn mind and decided to pivot towards the Dark Faction to support them in the upcoming war. With his conversion, the proxy territory between his vampire monarchy and the Dark Faction territory of Satan was completely abolished, making him a part of the frontier battle lines for the Light Faction. Although the battle had not boiled over at the two frontier planets where the vampires still shared custody with the barbarians after Mar-a-Lago fell with Ravens' heroics, it was only a matter of time before it did, and Regis had a strong gut feeling that the dastardly Werewolves clan would willingly come to the forefront to make matters difficult. Before things got out of control, he needed to reinforce the two border planets sufficiently enough so that when the fighting got worse, his side would not be caught unprepared. Damn it, we need more time. Regis muttered under his breath in frustration as the timeline of things was moving much faster than he anticipated. He wanted to be able to build his forces in peace, but with him suddenly being exposed to the Dark Faction directly, Border Patrol and Border Planet security needed to be strengthened immediately. "Your orders, my king?" asked the Aurelius clan commander as Regis sighed deeply before once again assuming his powerful emotionless face as he said, "Send an order to all clans to increase their mandatory border security quota by 20%. Revoke the Bloodfall clan's 1.5-year period or they don't need to pitch in soldiers, and ask them to send 150,000 troops under extraordinary circumstances, put Tier 6 gods in every destroyer ship on Border Patrol and arm the frontier planets to the teeth, sparing no expense. When the bloody werewolves finally do dare to come for our blood, they will once again feel the wrath of the Vampire Society befall them." Meanwhile Asiva had just completed her Tier 4 promotion test and was returning to the palace for her routine duties. To cope up with Max's absence, she had deliberately absorbed herself with work and training as she knew that war was inevitable in the coming times and she could not turn up to a fight as weak as she currently was. Sebastian was off to some adventure, while Anna was back at Vanaheim to train her archery and prepare to promote to Tier 5 as fast as possible. Severus was helping reduce her workload by pitching in as much as he could, but even then he was finding the time to train in between and was slowly closing in on reaching the level max for Tier 4 which he had been stuck on for the last 5 years. The Bloodfall clan alchemical department was booming now, and with the new master alchemist mass producing the formulas they had retrieved from the ancient Magi ruins, the Bloodfall clan was making a killing in this potion-starved market. The clan was raking in roughly about 3 billion in alchemy sales a month and could increase it to 5 in the coming 3 months. After the cut of the alchemist and the costs, it was still giving the state about 1.2 billion in gold coins a month, which helped alleviate a lot of financial pressures for Asiva. The military expansion was moving smoothly and Dark Sorrow was really whipping the new recruits into shape with hellish 6-week training regimes that transformed Tier 1 trainees into true soldiers with knowledge of formations, how to properly advance and retreat, and how to minimize casualties in war. With every clan suddenly focusing on military expansion, the demand for armor, alchemical products, and manpower had suddenly surged, which made it difficult for Bloodfall clan to poach talents. But thankfully Raven's image as a rising star and his legendary battle stories alongside the higher wages that the Bloodfall clan offered rather than the industry standard made it the first choice for many young talents. Jothi was also doing quite well. His information network had penetrated all corners of society deeply, and with state backing now he had become more confident in how he operated, which made his system more efficient, because even if he did end up losing some informants, it would not be as if his life would be in danger inside Dombivli, and he did not need to fear state extradition because of his contract with Raven. He had provided timely critical news to Asiva about various topics which helped in better policy formulation and had helped her stop a merchant strike before it happened, saving the clan millions in losses. The only problem now was that the absence of Raven Bloodfall from his throne was starting to be noticed. Many were asking about his eventual return date and updates of his excursion alongside Sebastian. For now Asiva was able to tackle these questions brilliantly, but she was sure that it would get more and more difficult with every passing month. /////A/N. Unbelievable milestone, guys, we have finally reached the 500 chapter mark. Thank you all who have supported this journey from the start. I'm truly overwhelmed at times from the love you guys have shown to my work. Cheers, to 500, hopefully many more to come. Also, I've cut down some parts of the stats panel and added it to the end below as usual, so check it if you want to, guys. //